focus for G2 is talking about how their early game works. Because I think that EG consistently have like less reliable early game plans, and then doing a little bit of VOD review to talk about their mid game because I investigated that less. But I mean, it's Jankos, so I think for most people, you understand what he's gonna do in the early game, right? Like I was looking for. Basically, when I was doing my G2 VOD review, this was legit the first fucking game I watched, guys. One sec. This was like legit the first game I watched. I just want to make sure this loads on stream properly. Yep. Okay. This was legit the first game I watched. And the ad is gonna play because I don't believe in ad block, but legit the first game I watched, dude is just like level 2 ganking mid. If you've watched a lot of G2, you know that Jankos plays like a ton of ganking jungles. Usually I see a lot of like 3-camp gank setup, so if you play Rise, right, very common is for your jungler to do 3 camps, get level 3, then go mid, so that's like 230 to 3. I think the main difference here, but this season, like what I noticed was a slight pattern where Jankos like is doing more level 2 ganks. One, because I think those are slightly more cheesy. So for example, if you're VTO here, you're probably expecting like a 3-minute gank, right? You're probably expecting a 3-minute gank because enemy team has Jarvan plus Rise. And so that's like very easy to get the snare off into the Jarvan EQ follow-up, and Jarvan usually would want to be like at least level 3. But he just level 2 ganks here. So this is like kind of something that I've seen G2 do more of. But this is funny because this was legit the first VOD I watched. And if you look at this is like the perfect G2 draft composition. Yeah. Where did MSF use their level 1 ward? I went and did the timestamps, so. Did they even? Oh, yeah. Okay. They used it on enemy red. So, this is another thing that you'll notice is that basically Targamas sees them invade here. So, this is another one. Targamas sees the invade, he knows that they're there. Sees Mercy walk into that bush. If you're walking into that bush, Mercy can either ward Pixel, right? He can ward here. Which is the brush behind the red buff, or he can ward like red. So if you're Targamas and you see Mercy's pathing like this, you're thinking, okay, he's warded one of these locations. So you can give that information to Jankos. At this point, Jankos is probably already considering. So if I were the jungler here, I would probably path down. The reason I would path down, and this would be like the logical way to do it, the reason I would path down from here is because Senor Khan versus Leona probably is going to be more reliable for you to not get invaded on versus like Gwen level 1 to Renekton level 1. So this is like kind of, at this point, I'm probably already starting top as Jankos. And this indicates to me, like, if I'm Jarvan, I can either do, like, single target clears. Gromp, blue, red. Theoretically, that's an option if I'm going to do a 3-camp. Or I can just do, like, full topside clears. Either one of those, VTO is going to be expecting at, like, 2:30, at, like, 3 minutes. But instead he goes mid. The other thing is that, like, Cassio's used to not go miasma until, like, level 4. They take it a lot earlier now. So you do like 2 points in Q or E. But they take it like level 3 now, so you can also get the more reliable like EQ from Jarvan. So those are a couple things that you can consider. The reason why I think this is like the perfect G2 composition after watching a ton of their games is you have like a gank setup on both solos, from Renekton and Rise. And then you have the fact that basically Jarvan, Jankos is playing like a ganking jungler, so either like Jarvan, Lee Sin, etc. Zhao. And then you have a bot laner who's going to be able to like get wave pretty safely. and clear away from that perspective, and a support that either can get prio in the matchup early on, or roams pretty easily, and gets flanks engages. Like, I think Targum, like, Rakan, especially in EU, is a champion where you get really free deep invades, and Hillsong actually is someone who's really known for this. You get really free deep invades because you can go like super ahead of your team into the enemy jungle, and then you have so many tools for just not getting caught, right? You've got a W, you've got basically being able to E back to someone in river. So like good supports often will recall before the rest of their team and go super early into the jungle to get jungle control and information. And then Rakan is a champion that's like really good at that, and I think that's an underrated reason why Rakan is like so popular, especially with players like Hillsong who do that aggressively. Can I elaborate on JoJo versus JoJo greater than humanoid? If you look at a sample of humanoid's VODs from summer, he didn't in 2021. He didn't actually perform that sick consistently, like mechanically speaking, and then also just in terms of looking for angles, playing in terms of like visualizing certain fight scenarios and things like that. He actually didn't perform like that insane last summer. I think last summer was probably one of the worst splits I've ever seen from him performance-wise overall. Anyway, but it's interesting because I thought that humanoid looked really sick between like 2020 and 2021. He actually was really good when I did reviews of his gameplay then. Speaking of humanoid, one thing that I found really interesting in these VOD reviews, and we'll get back to this game in a sec, because we're not going to VOD review this whole game, we're just going to talk about the setup in the context of like how G2 likes to play. Yeah, I put him third in my pre-worlds because I didn't watch him as closely as I watched him at the end of the season. So I don't know what you want from me, other than saying that. I do like your name though, so there's that. Got that going for you. Like, I never watch players as closely as thoroughly in like, basically there's a difference between doing VOD reviews of teams and VOD reviews of individual players. If you do VOD reviews of individual players, you're watching a game specifically for a player and only looking at that player and like how they're thinking, what they're doing in individual fights. Versus if you're doing a VOD review of a complete team, you're watching a bunch of different things at once. Yeah. Well, this stream isn't supposed to be a typical VOD review. It's supposed to be mostly like a discussion of G2 versus EG. So it's easier to like cut down and put on YouTube basically. Because I've already done the VOD reviews. Something that's really interesting if you look at Fnatic versus... If you look at Fnatic versus G2, the first time and second time. Actually, we're just gonna look at G2 match history, so it's easier to do for my small and puny brain. Okay. So in their first Fnatic series, one thing that I think is really important to point out is Leblanc. This is like very obvious, right? This is the most obvious shit. They banned Leblanc. The reason why this is relevant is because if we watch the rest of this particular game play out, So first of all, cap's not resetting here. I think it's relatively interesting, but not like too crazy. Because he should be able to get this reset whenever he wants. Like, Cassio is not going to be able to do a whole lot just off of having tier. Replay. So, let me see. I'm just gonna pull off the timestamp because I have it. Actually, it should happen about now. So, if you look at the bot wave, right, they're going to get this wave. Targamas goes for this recall here. Instantly books it top. So, what's really interesting to me about this particular game is that you have Gwen top lane. So, Gwen W makes it really difficult for Renekton to dive. One, because Renekton should be in a situation where if he wants to play like super aggressively for wave prio, he's losing HP to Gwen on the first couple of levels. So he should be like somewhat lower HP. His sustain is better now than it was, but it was like, it's not as good as it was like this time last year, right? So from this perspective, it's a lot easier to get topside priority off of, like, it should be really hard to dive Gwen unless something like that happens, like where Gwen uses W like that and you have like 4 members, but they will consistently allocate these resources to top for these types of dives. So if you're against a top laner that's really hard to dive with like 2 champions, they'll always bring 3. If you have a top laner that's like really hard to dive with like 3 champions, they'll bring Targamas, right? I think Targamas is probably one of the best performing members on this team. He's just constantly ahead of the rest of G2 on the map. He constantly goes top on room timers, things like this. So for me, like, Targamas is like a really key player when you were assessing like how G2 and EG will do, you know? And I also think, in terms of, like, dive execution, Jankos he's not, like, the most insane mechanical player, right? So that's, like, another thing to keep in mind. So, usually these types of plays go a lot better if Targamas or caps are involved. So what was interesting to me, right, is like when we're talking about G2's early game, the next question that you have is what happens when Jankos doesn't play like these ganking junglers, and you're not able to execute like through man's top as well. You're not able to gank mid as early on. So for this one, Diana, like a lot of times people play Diana to just full clear to 6. I think that there's just a lot of situations where you can see Broken Blade like playing like this. Holy shit. Never underestimate where a few days can take you. Thank you. Okay. And he's just really desperately trying to get this in, so I probably should go back just so you guys see the setup. Okay, so on this window, we see Jankos, everyone going on bot side, so we know pretty much where jungle mid are. It was a blue buff contest. Now on this window, basically it's Broken Blade's sort of job to prime the wave, like maybe either stack it or crash it, as Jankos goes for top side. So Jankos has some time to do these camps. This wave is going to crash too early to make a play on this cannon wave. But he can maybe look for a play on the next wave. So this is a situation where, okay, this wave is in. He should be totally free. So if you're playing like a range versus melee top matchup, you often want to like look for maybe some harass where you're initially targeting, like, so after this goes down, you can look for a trade here. So as soon as you see the light go down and target this creep, you can look for a harass here and then try to back out, like these types of small trades that you can look for. And then the continue to look for those types of positions. So in this case, because they put the blue ward on red buff haven't spawned yet, you assume that XL, like if you just saw Jarvan bot and Jarvan isn't on his bot camps, either he's going to do Grump and then go top, or he's going to go recall, walk all the way top, do Crux, right? So these are options that he has, and Berkeley's just like looking for her ass under tower. And now, yeah. So this was really weird because he ends up just burning flash here, and I think there's like no world where he should have to burn flash here. He just did this. And then he sees Marcoon up like that. So basically this is a situation where it's like you're taking into account what the enemy jungler is doing. You're either burning flash aggressively because of this position, but because of the vision allocated on all of this jungle, I feel like there's never a situation where you aren't taking into account the fact that Marcoon could be topside, and then you're burning flash like this. So this is like a lot of things where it feels like you consistently see Broken Blade playing like there is no jungler. I would compare him to like Bin in that regard, where he's like consistently playing as if there is no jungler and there is no enemy jungler on the map, and you have no information. And so that's why when you're constantly seeing G2 force a lot of allocations of resources to topside, I feel like it's not necessarily just because they think Broken Blade can carry, which he does in some situations, but it's because they feel like unless they're basically split mapping top, he's not going to either manage wave properly or take jungle into account. I will do some predictions on EG versus G2. I'm not doing like a real VOD review. I'm just showing like some examples of gameplay and considerations that I make when talking about the matchup. So there are a couple of examples where since we had brought up the Fnatic series already, let's talk about Leblanc. So this was the first Fnatic series in playoffs, right? So I found this really interesting. Before we get to the mid play, just like how intently Fnatic end up marking this lower try. And I didn't watch enough EE to know if this is just like something that they do. But they had initially warded this. Razork did the top 2 camps, 3 camps. It's really hard for Trundle to look for a gank on LeBlanc anyway. And obviously the Trundle Volibear matchup is like super common globally. Zillion places a ward and Zillion ends up like sweeping, or no, sorry. Targamas looks like ends up sweeping this ward. Really hard to tell exactly because I get to see humanoid LeBlanc stats instead. And then or the ward ends up dying on one of those. And then Razork immediately replaces it as well. So this indicates to me that they're like really prioritizing understanding the path from support to mid. LeBlanc, well, all LeBlanc matchups are very jungle reliant because LeBlanc would have like a lot of reliable wave clear without jungle interference, and LeBlanc is very, very strong in skirmishes. So like mid jungle 2v2 skirmishes. So you'll see a lot in Europe, like I saw this not just G2, in a lot of games where the jungle will like go mid reliably level 3, support will get wave in, reliably go mid level 3, and then LeBlanc ends up having a lot of value in those situations. So I guess like all of this groundwork that I'm laying is how important the mid jungle 2v2 is for G2. And just mid jungle support, mid jungle in general. So they're warding like these jungle entrances. I think in general it's expected to keep some information on Jankos. But the reason why I like this is because you have attention to detail on like the specific ward placements. And then Raise Arc looking mid. Either to catch wave and prevent Caps from crashing this wave while Humanoid comes back. Or to maybe set up a gank. I mean, keeping Caps in lane on the slow mana is actually really high value. He takes like way too much damage here, but I like the thought process, right? Is they aren't guaranteeing Caps like a reset for free, which means that there won't be a window for Caps to like either roam top or roam towards bot side. And obviously now we have I don't know, like bot lane thing, but happens. Hello song on Enchanters, am I right? Meanwhile, top lane. So this game was also extremely weird to me. Because... And then before we get to mid-game stuff, I just wanted to touch on something that happened this game. Which was more mid-game oriented. So... in this situation, and we'll go back and start earlier. I think it's good to start earlier here. In this situation, Fnatic are out on the map first. So usually in the game, like what you end up seeing is sideliners competing to push out side waves effectively with tempo. So Humanoid out on the map first, Caps just recalled. So now Humanoid has a window to threaten. So typically when LeBlancs have windows to threaten first and you have this kind of vision control on River, set up from Fnatic having tempo on the map, basically what LeBlanc will want to do is she'll want to stand on pink wards and fog and then kind of like zone people off of plays, or she'll stand in jungle and wait for like Orianna to walk up and answer this wave. And then look to make a pick with jungler or something along those lines. So in this case, I think Orianna will show... No, Orianna doesn't want to show on the wave if she doesn't see Volibear. And she doesn't want to give information to LeBlanc on exactly where she is. So instead, LeBlanc is doing exactly what we talked about, which is she's like hovering mid. And they drop this Rift Herald. So they know that Fnatic are really, really ahead on the play here because one, they have a Sidelane timer, and two, they have Rift Herald. So Rift Herald is going to give them like a lot more pressure, a lot more control. But at the same time, because Fnatic are all showing like this, and they can reasonably expect that Hillsong's or that Humanoid is in topside jungle, even before he shows like this, then at this point, like there's really no reason for Broken Blade and Caps not to get these waves, right? So my thought process here would be, okay, they've basically allocated their vision. They've taken this top side. So now G2 have all of this bot control. And then as Dragon is spawning in like 24 seconds, Both of their solo or Caps has TP here. So if Caps get this wave, hopefully like Aphelios can stall and collect this wave as it comes in. This Rift Herald might get a second crash off, but it won't do a ton of damage. Like they don't have to get the tower. Now Broken Blade's in this position. They have a really nice flank setup, right? So this is off of this wave being like this, Drake being about to spawn, the fact that Fnatic showed all on the mid wave at this point, and they also have top wave in, so this means that Fnatic will also lose all of this XP and gold on this top turret. So this kind of like play setup or map setup is good, right? Like they got priority to create this angle. But the thing that's really weird to me is that they just kind of like allow this to happen, right? They're basically taking the wins for the creeps that Fnatic are losing, and they're not using the vision advantage and the setup or the caps TP to create like a meaningful flank or anything like this. And you might be saying, yes, but Upset has ulti, and Zillion has ulti, and it's Leblanc, and all of these things. But this is like, if you're not going to get basically a better flank setup on Drake priority than this. So I just find that extremely weird. Like at the very least, you're going to blow like one of the ultimates, one of the key ultimates, and then like be able to play out the fight from there without using things like Ornn ultimate, Rakan engage, just because you have Broken Blade with this division. So things like this were really weird to me. Because it felt like there would be multiple instances in G2's mid game where they would have side wave set up properly and positional advantage, but then they would just like lack trigger pull of some kinds. Fnatic do not need 5 people mid here. To answer your question, Peter, no. I think that's a mistake that G2 capitalized on, but they did not actually like execute on the play that they set up. Now you're here because you thought you heard your dad. Common problems. Okay, here we go. We're gonna do cocktail grooves, I guess. This is just gonna end up being electronic music again. I don't know why we do this to ourselves. Common problems? I don't even know what I'm talking about. I already forgot. So the interesting thing about G2 is you may notice that the only champion that they play that's really a tank is Ornn. And you might say, Kelsey, isn't that just globally true? And you would be sort of correct. By the way, thanks for follows, Ohio Sensei, Poopbutt Totoro, Mr. Dr. Pepper Porter, and 711 11Z. It is 4:30 a.m. at the moment for me. And thank you for the follow, Gray of Blood. So what you may have noticed is that they play Ornn. So when they play Ornn, this means that we don't have to play the top side, because Ornn has a million options for not getting ganked or not getting a playmate on, and for managing the wave, and for not playing like super aggro. By the way, I love the Gregs into the Ornn pick. It's good stuff. But this was like Okay, I guess Yankos goes bot. That's like literally the weirdest thing for me because it feels like consistently they'll make plays like mid into top. But then when you have situations in playoffs, Yankos goes bot. And the Flacket got like actually a lot of praise, as far as I could tell, on socials during this like playoffs pivot because suddenly they were playing Ornn. That's like the best way that I can put it. That's literally, it's, okay. RNG/TS. I was thinking of maybe changing commands for MSI. All playlists become electronic. Jaegers just sits here, guys. He's like, okay. So let's go back to the level 1 because I'm really curious. I can't remember exactly what happened in this game. So, Broken Blade leashes. Broken Blade leashes, Yankos, shock and surprise, level 2 ganks mid. No one saw this coming. Weird. Crazy. So now you have full information on what the fuck he could be doing. I'm probably not gonna live view on this side. There are like a few reasons for that. One being that I'm technically shadowing production, so it's probably like not copacetic for me to also live view against the main product, even though I'll get like not many viewers compared to them, so they won't probably even notice. But the other thing is just like time, and I think for me it makes more sense to do like YouTube videos during MSI. But maybe we'll do like some VOD review streams or something. That'll be fun. And he sits here. He just like, he's vibing. So like, let's look, 3 minutes when he comes down. He's vibing for like full 20 seconds. It's the kill off and then Razork matches. Because it's like, realistically speaking, where the fuck do we think he is? He's probably shadowing bot because like level 2, Thresh versus Nautilus, Aphelios starts to gain levels. Aphelios can actually like prevent the wave from crashing. Hooray! Shocking. So that's like one way to deal with G2's early game is I don't think that Yankos' pathing is that crazy good. It's like he can level 2 gank. He can shadow. But the main thing for me that I think is interesting for playoffs was when they started to be able to play to bot side and they hadn't before. Like typically it's Targamas will look for a gap in the wave. They'll basically clear evenly, and then Targamas will look to go top or mid. But in these levels of playoffs, like you started to see Yankos being able to play around bot. I think playing around bot was like the way to go to MSI, right? So that's another element. So one thing that I didn't cover enough, I think, was basically mid-game stuff. For G2. So what I wanted to look at was like how they play mid game with this type of composition. And whether or not we see consistent trends in their inability to capitalize on like profitable mid-game lane setups. So this still feels like early game, which is weird to have like so many healthy turrets at this point in the game. But we do. So you'd want to look at something like this. Like, how do they set up for the strike? So you go back like 2 minutes before. And this is exactly the timer that you would expect people to retake bot. So this is the time where you expect G2 to take Vision bot 2 minutes before Drake. So this is something that I think now people just understand as common, but G2 was sort of initially known for was like these types of timers, right? Where they are aggressively placing Vision on the side of the map where they don't want to be next. So they have like some bot side wards, they pushed up all the way, they're recalling, and now they're going top to contest top, assuming that someone will have to catch and push out this bot wave or lose all of that XP there. So that's like Odo Omna doing the catch in this position, and now G2 rotating top to push out and then start to take topside vision. So typically you'd want the start to already be on the stop wave so that you can push out this one and then the next one before the drink. So this is something that's maybe a little bit behind here. But ultimately, because you have Ornn and Jarvan, you're not too concerned, because that'll allow you to basically face check into a lot of these situations. So if you don't have perfect neutral setup with champions like Ornn, then you're in a much better position, right? Whereas like with their Camille, you can consistently get wave priority, play those situations out, push out on the map, and then stand near Dragon before Dragon spawns. I also really like this from Rogue, right? Dropping this Retailed here right before Dragon spawns, because now G2 are forced to respond to this pressure position instead of just rotating to take Drake vision. So now Rogue have set up on this Dragon. So champions like Ornn will let G2 have like imperfect rotations or setups in mid-game. I think this is true for like every team. It's like an underrated reason why Ornn was so OP. It gives you face check potential. It's also why people started, especially in like emerging regions, started really prioritizing champions like Sion. Like Sion had, when I was doing my emerging region VOD reviews, Sion had like an insane amount of priority in regions like LCO, LLA, CBLOL. Thank you for the subscription, Gangarith. Thank you so much for using your Prime here. You have many choices for your Prime, so. So, this is kind of interesting, because technically Rogue should have positional advantage here. But they go for mid-wave. And this is weird, because you would expect that G2 would want to contest this mid-wave, right? You would expect that. The problem is that Rogue are not in a position where they want to get this Drake. Like, Rogue are just not in a position where they want to get this Drake, because it would be soul point for G2. So, if anything, G2 should be the ones on this mid-wave, because they want to be able to create a trade play opportunity out of Rogue overforcing this Drake. And Rogue should be on this Drake, right? So from that perspective, maybe the thought process from Rogue is, if we get this wave, we don't have to worry about a trade play, we get the Drake for free. But if that's the case, they should have contested the previous wave, not this one. This is like too late. Because now they'll be trying to retake versus Ornn, Jarvan, Renata. Like, there's no way that you can do this, right? So for me, it's like they get the last wave, then they walk in, they take this. If G2 look for a trade, then they can pull off and look for a flank. Or they have someone catch this wave on T2. But I think this Drake is too important to Rogue. Also, I don't even like this ult, because you're just going for Trimby. Trimby still has ulti. It's nowhere near as impactful as... Like, theoretically, they wanted to use Ornn ulti for, like, Larsen comp. But comp flashed, so I guess there's that. It was the caps package. The caps package! This wasn't the Ornn ult that I was criticizing, it was the caps package. The Ornn ult was fine. Regardless, they end up in a choke versus Renata. And just lose like that. Hello, Munchables. How's it going? So, yeah, for me, I think, like, G2 understands sideway pressure, but they're actually kind of behind on recalls. In most of the examples that I saw, Ornn lets them retake, Ornn lets them not play to top, so, like, Ornn is super, super crucial for G2. Ornn does get nerfed in time for MSI. I actually want to double check those nerfs. Ornn. Because often those nerfs are really useless. Doesn't matter. Oh no, he doesn't get nerfed. He's nerfed after MSI, right? Yeah, he's nerfed after MSI. So, yeah, Ornn is still gonna be huge. Indeed. Nice. Like, Ornn is gonna be huge for G2 at MSI. I think Ornn is huge for both G2 and EG, technically. But, yeah. I think it's bigger. I think it's more important. Ornn is more important for G2 than it is for EG. So, let's talk about EG then. I think these are huge factors, and I'll explain why they're important once we go over some EG points. Because I think the biggest difference between... Well, actually there are a lot of difference between EG and G2, but one of the biggest ones is jungle. And how EG approach early game. Wait. Well, enjoy this Old Spice ad for a few seconds. So this was a game, if you guys remember. This was the game that EG lost playoffs. And what happened... Or no, I'm trolling. Trying to remember the point I was wanting to make with this game, with this clip. Probably start at the proper timestamp. I just mislabeled it. I mean, EG do lose bot 2v2. That is relevant. And that is stuff that we will talk about. I mean, there's not a whole lot to talk about it because I don't have pro views of their bot lane. Okay, so this isn't... For some reason I had this marked as a level 1 choose, but it's not a level 1 choose. It's a level 5 invade. So the biggest difference between how a lot of EG games get resolved versus a lot of G2 games get resolved is EG games are a lot more jungle focused in terms of playing for jungle advantages as opposed to lane advantages. And that's a function of how Inspired played, right? Because we remember when we did the Rogue VOD reviews last year, Inspired just consistently played for jungle leads. And it was really just kind of down to a lack of communication with laners and jungle on certain plays, where Inspired would just go for stuff, and then laners were expected to kind of cover him. I think that that's still kind of true for how he plays. In this particular case, we have like JoJo recalling second after Takui. So let's look at how this is set up. Technically, this is preventable, right? So we see Afron has a Deo to get crab. Technically, this is preventable if JoJo wants to stall this and force like jungle mid to do anything, but they should have a slight advantage for Ari Draven in like early skirmishes. So if they're expecting a 2v2 answer, then they won't do it. Either way, this wave gets in. Takui gets first recall. And now JoJo has to expend ults back. And there's a play window from FlyQuest ball lane and from mid because of the way this mid recall happened. So this is a window where you would have to either cover Inspired's blue buff if they're going to look for an invade, or you'd have to cover mid, because there are a couple of plays here that can be made. They can look for like a mid dive, or they can look for a blue buff invade. Mid dive is way less reliable, especially since JoJo Jojo, like, secured level 6 before recalling. So that means he already used ulti, but he'll have E, and he'll have wave clear, right? Plus he'll have enough AP to clear the waves. So unless you have a lot of time to build up like extra waves, you have multiple players going for mid, there's no way that this is a reliable play. Like, he just gets waved and he backs out. So instead, what you should expect is for them to look for an invade bot side or a play on bot lane off of mid prio on this level 6 timer from Takui. That's exactly what they do. I think that this is just not contestable from EG. It's kind of how I feel. Like, this, you just kind of have to get this. Like, theoretically, you can out-hounds this, or you hands this, or you can outplay this mechanically. But it should just not be contestable, considering the map state. And FlyQuest get 2 kills off of this. So stuff like this being, like, how they will defend, or how they will set up reactionary plays off of jungle camps. Let's see. This one... Oh, yeah, this was... Okay. So everyone is gonna mean the shit out of the draft. Right? Everyone is gonna mean the shit out of this draft. But I think some of the crucial things that you miss here... This was from the first EG versus TL series, Game 5. And obviously Renekton in Italy. The crucial thing here is it's Renekton in Italy into the Scion. So you basically have to make some kind of play happen top here. Instead, what you're gonna get... Shit. Red Bull gives you wings! Instead, you get wings. I'm not instituting ad block. Okay. Is you get a bot play dive. So that's not like a perfect dive by any means. That was actually quite sad. Because I mean, Santorin should not have aggro there, theoretically. Like, that shouldn't happen. Like, poor JJ ends up dropping aggro, doing the Abyssal Diet voyage, and I don't think that they accounted for that for some reason. Probably because they thought that they could get the reset and then get out, but whatever. Happens, man. Here, yeah, they need to 3-man dive top if you're talking about EG. Like, this should be a 3-man. So, like, either you're playing for, like, Riot Spam Wave look top, or you're playing for something else. But anyway, I got distracted by the bot play. But instead what they do is they play for crab. So this is a window where this wave is, like, they have a stack wave set up top on impact, right? So this is a stack wave set up top. Inspired, theoretically, kind of low HP here, but he gets the smite off, so he's fine. Smite and level up off. Instead of going for crab here, what they should have done is they should have prepped this wave to look for a top dive, because it's like a level 4 wave stack. It's a 4th wave stack, I mean. So this should be an angle where they're looking for this play, but they can't do it with 2, right? They have to do it with 3. So they missed their window to do this, and instead, because you can count the number of camps that Santorin has and you know he dies, it's like, okay, what's the viable trade play here? Probably 1 camp up in bot side, especially since he doesn't have blue side, and blue buff and crab. That's the viable instance here. Keep in mind this is like early crab, so it's useless. But they go for the blue buff. I feel like this is just never that great. Like, yeah, sure, you get blue buff, but one, considering death timers, this shouldn't actually be a play, right? So you should be in a situation where you're not getting this blue buff. You're basically just setting up outside vision, and then you're looking to try to retake topside again, or you're looking to try to make another play on topside again. This just felt like a horrific waste of time. So then we'll get to the classic JoJo top play. So now we have this wave set up. We're going to set up and look for this play again. And it's just two people instead, when I think you ideally would have Nidalee here, right? Like, ideally you'd have Nidalee here already. Instead that they went for the blue buff invade. So this felt really strange. They managed to get the play off regardless. But then he's also late to contest these Krugs. So this just felt like a weird miscommunication and misunderstanding of like what's actually relevant or what's actually possible to do on the map. And it just felt like, again, like there's weird misunderstanding of priority between lanes and jungle. And that's like something that I see that we saw with Inspired playing on Rogue last year. That's something that we see with Inspired playing on EG this year. It just feels like Inspired wants to play for jungle, and lanes want to play for lanes. And it's very weird that you would have this on a team in general, but that's how it feels watching these games. And then this is the play that everyone remembers. Where, okay, they do the top play, now what happens is JoJo recalls. So everyone flamed JoJo for this, I remember, in the community. JoJo goes bot here, so a couple of reasons this is bad. One is he's on the cusp of getting level 6. So he should just get level 6 and then look to make a play off of level 6. So this is something that JoJo should do instead. But two, one thing that people didn't realize is that, look at Hansama's items. Look at Danny's items. Like, what needs to happen in this game for this to work out? You need someone to hover bot, for bot to get a recall, so you don't just lose the goddamn game. So JoJo goes here. So this all snowballs off of like the weird bot timings. If Inspired had gone top before, he would have been able to also get top camps on a timer that made sense. So he would be bot here. So this whole thing, like, JoJo got flamed for, but someone has to do this. I don't know why it's JoJo coming here, but someone has to do this, right? And Nidalee gets the midway. So this whole sequence was a JoJo flame, but this is just like a weird team thing. I don't understand why this happened, right? So there's just like a lot of instances in EG's early game like this. It has to be done. It has to be mentioned. Since we have to mention it outside of talking about weird jungle things, we'll mention it not here, but we'll use this VOD to mention it. Deliveroo! Thanks everyone for bearing with me, by the way. On the stuff. It has to be mentioned. It has to be mentioned. Why? Let's watch it again. Why? Now the classic. Okay, okay, the classic. The classic's happening. He's auto-attacking the wave. Which means he's CCing himself. Oh, snap! Sucks. We had to mention it. I didn't want to do it to him. Had to do it to him. Morning. Just because this kind of thing happens a lot, where there will just be weird decision-making in lane. Like, why is he walking up here to auto this when the creeps aren't even that low? Right? He's trying to thin the wave. Like, theoretically, that's what he's doing. He's trying to thin the wave. So I get that. There's, like, one low creep, but ultimately this ended up doing nothing for him, and he just took free harass, right? So now he's in a lot of danger on this tower dive. Yeah, so it's just like, we have to mention things like this happening, even though typically we don't want to talk about those types of things, because they're not as interesting, and it's like, oh, okay, this player entered. This, though, is more interesting. Because when you hear people talk about how Danny gets back into games after this, don't see any issues here. People point this out a lot, especially commentators. So no one's going bot here after recall. So this happens after wave is nullified bot. No one's going bot here initially. Impact's getting this wave in. So this is like a classic way you would set up a swap. So you would have this happen, and then you would have top go bot after this wave. So typically you just have top recall here, but instead impact stays. So it doesn't look like they're swapping. Also, if anyone tells you that Shen is getting into Aatrox, they're trolling. I'm just an aside. And now Danny's top. So they're willing to basically make this trade for guaranteed T1. But this isn't the most interesting thing about this play, right? Neither is Bubba dying. Most interesting thing about this play is that they leave Danny here. Up in tempo to solo get T2, XP and gold with vision in place. So the vision in place is something that you can see Vulcan doing here. We see members of TL on the map. We know that they're on bot side. EG are all ahead in tempo, and Danny gets top T2 solo gold and XP. So now he's back in the game. So stuff like this is not stuff that you'll see as commonly from other teams at MSI. It's just basically being able to funnel gold XP onto Danny after he has a bad lane base. So you'll want champs like EG will want champs like Jinx and Aphelios for this. Also, this is just like a mistake from TL. Because they're overstaying tempo just because they see Danny top. When the rest of EG all got recalls off and headed bot. You pick Shen because of the ult and playing for other lanes. I mean, you can still pick human matchups into Aatrox that have TP. I mean, I just feel like you shouldn't pick Shen into Aatrox, like, ever. It's one of the worst matchups for Shen. So let's see, what else? I don't want to just continue to talk about jungle weirdness. Because I think we sort of made that point. Most of my timestamps are for that. But that continued to be a trend of their early game. Like, their early game issues were very much about, like... Most of the time, the difference between G2 and EG are... It's mid covering for jungle on EG, as opposed to G2, which is jungle covering for mid. And jungle playing for mid. I think that that's the primary difference. So for me, the big thing when we talk about that matchup is that considering JoJo's historical tendency to not acknowledge jungle, basically he plays mid, like, very much focused on the 1v1. I think that there will be a lot of issues with EG being able to respond to G2's early game in that regard. Because I think that you won't have Inspired covering mid, and you'll have, like, the Jankos cheese ganks into top lane plays. I think the top lane plays might be less successful, but the fact that they are willing to allocate the resources and EG is not is a bigger factor. One other thing I'll point out, though, that is useful for... The one thing that I think is worth pointing out is something that mattered way more in playoffs was I actually think Vulcan stepped up a lot. One sec. So we actually see Vulcan covering for a lot of plays here. So this is something, this entire exchange was interesting. Is because I could see this being somewhat relevant to an EG versus G2 game. First of all, I think Impact, there were multiple times in this lane phase where Impact could have just killed Kumo. Part of that was Kumo trolling, though. That's another thing. Like post 6, but that's something else. So EG get wave and bot. Inspired gets Drake. And then Vulcan is the first on mid here. What's interesting to me about this is Inspired still goes for camps, but Vulcan will cover mid on certain windows. So this is something that I saw happening more in playoffs when EG started looking better. It was just like Vulcan in some regards covering for mid. And Inspired does end up getting this ward to his credit, so it's not like he's just not doing nothing and oinking while Vulcan does his job, but it's something that is worth highlighting. So I think for the most part, people will say that this is a gigantic support gap, but I did see Vulcan improve throughout the season, just in terms of his general map control and play in the early game. But I expect it, if they're to be like a mid-jungle support 3v3, it'll be more like a mid-jungle support 3v2. Because I don't think that you'll have a situation where Inspired, JoJo, and Vulcan are all on the same page. As for the top matchup, I also, like, people in chat are talking about the top matchup. It's like, what we're gonna get is we're gonna get Impact playing, like, Ornn, Gwen, Akali, or champs that don't get played to, and G2 like 3 and 4 manning top is my anticipation of what will happen. So it's not really going to be like a 1v1 matchup. The other thing that's interesting or worth noting about the early game and the changes is I think that even though theoretically, like if you think about Danny's champion pool, it's like Kai'Sa, Tristana, like all these champs, they got like some buffs for MSI. And theoretically could be playable with especially Jinx laning phase nerfs, considering how EG use map pressure to compensate for laning phase deficits. it's not as viable to do things like give Danny a full solo T2 on tempo play with like a Kaisa or Kaisa. With a Trist, you can do that. So with Trist, I think it's still viable. So Trist will be like a huge thing if Trist is viable. So that'll be nice. I don't know if they're Kaisa buffs, but it's like slight Kaisa changes that I think are more in tune with Danny's playstyle. So like looking at it, there were buffs to the shield, I think, scaling for AP. I'm trying to remember exactly what the changes were. But to me, it felt like it was, depending on how you play Kaisa, it was a buff. But probably it's a nerf to like the poke Kaisa, right? That is how I read it. Yeah, so you get an overall passive AP ratio, and the AP ratio on W is reduced, but you have AP ratio on ult and passive increased. So if you play like all-in Kaisa with some AP or hybrid builds, then I think it's like a slight buff. And I think that that's more how Danny is good at Kaisa, because I don't really think of Danny as like the poke Kaisa player. I see him as like opportunistic Kaisa player. But that is... Yeah, the Jhin buff is really nice. So I had talked about this for... actually Team A's. The team from, like, Liga Latinoamerica. Because I think that their team fighting is bad, but their, like, pick comp playing style is actually pretty good. So I think that that's good. I also think it's good for G2. I think it's, like... I'm gonna be really honest, I think the AD changes, despite the fact that there's like slight church buffs, are bad for EG and good for G2, because I don't think that Flacket's a teamfight player. I think Flacket's team fighting is really bad, and Danny's is like sick as fuck. So, from that perspective, I think the changes like slightly favor G2 in the matchup as well. Because you're going to... Like, neither of these bot lanes really want to lane 2v2. So that's a nice thing for EG, is that neither of these bot lanes really want to lane 2v2. And I don't think that EG's... My assumption is that EG's 2v2 laning is going to be worse. But neither of these teams, like, really play for 2v2. So I could be completely wrong on that anyway. And then But neither of these teams really want to do that, and EG wants to play for tempo trades on sides that get extra gold onto Danny, which is harder to do with the AD carry meta that's in place. And then for G2, they are way better at doing like rotations into pick than playing for like gold advantage on AD, and they suck at team fights. So if you're going for like Jhin or something like that, then I think that that will be way better for G2 than EG. Yeah, Ezreal I think would be okay, but that's kind of how I feel. I think that mid game for EG, other than those advantages, is like slightly disadvantaged, but I do see situations where, like one thing that I think will surprise people is I do think that there will be situations where Vulcan will actually get, recall off and map tempo advantage on Targamas, which almost never happens, in EU. And I think that that'll be like one of the key things as to determining whether or not EG can win a mid game, is one, if they get a favorable teamfight composition, and two, if Vulcan can be ahead on the map ahead of Targamas. But right now I see the matchup, particularly because of the way mid-jungle operates, to be G2 favored, and also particularly because of the like slight meta shifts, deprioritizing methods for EG to get an advantage. So that's like kind of my estimation, is I see it being slightly G2 favored in that group. I actually don't. The thing that's exciting about it, though, is that I do see ways for both teams to win. Because I think the way that EG naturally play top lane, for example, is good into the way G2 play top lane, in terms of putting impact on more of a scaling or self-sustaining pick. I think Ornn being contested would be really good for EG as well. And as long as G2 don't get Ornn, then there won't be a situation where G2 are playing super hard to bot side, which will be really good for EG, because EG usually struggle the most with like bot side pressure and then mid lane pressure in terms of jungle attention. So I think that those are things that EG can put in their favor, and I think that if there is a team fight, having Danny on your team is kind of OP. So for it's having Danny and Impact, like I think Danny and Impact are better team fighters than Broken Blade and Flakked. I think that Caps, and also Inspired, is a better team fighter than Jankos. I think Jankos is doing a lot of weird mechanical misplays lately. And I think that Caps and Vulcan's also very good in team fights. So I think like basically it's just Caps who's better in team fights than JoJo. I'm gonna be really honest. I think the early game stuff though is just like too OP for G2, and the fact that G2 actually kind of understands sideline timers better than like JoJo does, or JoJo and the Vulcan do. I think that that's like the main advantages I would look at, is just like mid jungle being an issue in early game, and then sideline timers in late game as being G2 favorite, and that's why I favor them slightly. But I don't think this is like a huge easy clap or anything. Yeah, that's where I am on it.